Hello, everybody. Praying everybody's having a great day, and I'm glad you've taken the time to join us for this week's lesson. The final chapter of the Gospel of John evokes the recent trend of a post-credits scene from a movie. After the main story has been told, John includes one last scene to further add details about what's to come. After Jesus' resurrection and his appearances, he meets with the disciples near Galilee, and a major outcome of this meeting is Peter's restoration to his former status. No finite work could fully explain Jesus' ministry, so John's eyewitness account is only part of those truths. So there's kind of a bird's eye view of John chapter 21. As we continue our study through the resurrection accounts of Jesus, we have moved into John chapter 21. The first 14 verses of this chapter, John 21 verses 1 through 14, will be the focus of today's lesson. John begins by describing another encounter between the disciples and Jesus following his resurrection. In this chapter, in this passage that we're about to look at, 7 have an unsuccessful night fishing, possibly a sign that their calling is to be ministers, not anglers. The figure on the beach tells them to cast their net to the other side of the boat, resulting in a massive catch. John realizes the man on the beach is Jesus, and then Peter dives overboard to swim to shore. There the other disciples arrive to find a breakfast of bread and fish waiting for them along with Jesus. So John 21, 1 through 14 will be our first study in this chapter. There's a whole lot of things to look at. This account in John recalls another incident a few years before when Jesus responded to a fruitless night of fishing by commanding Peter to cast his nets off the other side of the boat. Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. They go out fishing. They're unsuccessful. But the result was a clear miracle. It resulted in Peter's declaration of faith. In John 21, Jesus gives a similar instruction with similar results. John 21, verses 1 and 2, we'll start there in the NIV. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. So doubting Thomas is here. We just finished looking at him in the previous lessons. Now to this point, the resurrected Jesus has made at least 3 specific appearances to groups of disciples. We know he appeared to the 2 men on the road to Emmaus from Luke 24. We know he appeared to a group of disciples without Thomas in John 20:19, and then a week later with Thomas present in John 20:26. We also know he's met with the women at the tomb. Matthew 28:9 and 10 gives a good account of that. Jesus passed along instructions for the disciples in his meeting with the women in Matthew 28:9 and 10 to meet him in Galilee. Now, John typically uses the term Galilee to refer to the region and the name of the lake where they often fished. They spent a lot of time there. This was very familiar territory. Other names for the Sea of Galilee, so that you might not get confused as different translations read differently, if it's referred to as the Sea of Tiberias or Lake Gennesaret, it's all the same body of water. It's the Sea of Galilee, which is really a large lake up in the northern region. I want you to notice in verse 2 that Peter is once again at the top of a list of the disciples. And this is important because for all of his issues, Peter is clearly the leader of this group. Now, it's not clear if all the disciples made their way to Galilee yet, but for now, there's 7 of them. Peter, Thomas, this is doubting Thomas, Nathanael, James, and John, and 2 others who are not named. John 21 in verse 3. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we are going with you also. They went out and immediately got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. It's important to remember that they went to Galilee because Jesus told them to do so. He told the women to tell them that back in Matthew 28 and verse 10. Some believe that Peter was wrong to go fishing. They believe this was a compromised return to his former occupation. He's giving up. Others believe Peter disobeyed no command and was simply wise and practical. Here's what Adam Clarke, the late preacher who lived from 1762 to 1832, he's got some really good commentaries on the scriptures. Here's what Adam Clarke wrote about this fishing expedition in John 21. Previously to the crucifixion of our Lord, the temporal necessities of himself and his disciples appear to have been supplied by the charity of individuals. As it is probable that the scandal of the cross had now shut up this source of support, the disciples, not fully knowing how they were to be employed, purposed to return to their former occupation of fishing in order to gain a livelihood. And therefore the 7 mentioned in John 21:2 embarked on the Sea of Tiberias, otherwise called the Sea of Galilee. Now, Clark's using a lot of language from that era. But basically his thought on this was that they don't know what to do at this point. They know that Jesus has risen from the dead. They believe that. They know that he told them to meet him in Galilee, so they're there, but he's not there yet. They really don't know what to expect next. They believe, but they're not bold yet in their faith. And up to this point, for the last 3 years, they've been ministers. They've been supported, like ministers today are supported by the church. Okay? It's probable that following the crucifixion of Jesus, a lot of that support dried up out of fear of Judea's religious leaders. So they need to figure out a way to make a living. So they go back doing what they know best, and that's fishing. So what John 21:3 shows is that Peter and the other disciples were uncertain. They weren't sure as to what they should do next. And this uncertainty contrasts sharply with their assured sense of purpose. We talk about this all the time, certainty of purpose. If you're going to be successful in life, if you are going to be an effective ambassador for Christ, you have got to have a certainty of purpose. They don't have a certainty of purpose yet. They're faithful, they believe, they're trying, but they're not all the way there yet. They're still uncertain. And this contrasts sharply with that certainty of purpose that they will get following the day of Pentecost. Regardless whether their motives were good or bad, on this particular night, they don't catch anything. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus, John 21:4 from the New American Standard. The previous 3 resurrection appearances in John's Gospel were each unexpected. This also seems to be unexpected. The disciples did not know that it was Jesus, not at first. And we don't know exactly why they didn't know it was Jesus. It's likely that they just didn't recognize him. They've been out on the lake fishing all night. It's sunrise. It's hazy. They're tired. So they're not likely to recognize someone standing far away on the shore. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. Now, depending on which translation of the Bible you read, Jesus refers to the disciples here in John 21, verse 5, as friends or as children. The original Greek term used here is paidon, P-A-I-D-O-N. It refers to a child, to children, or to a baby. This would certainly describe the disciples at this point in their faith. They're alive in their faith, but they're still like children in their faith. But it's also important to note that while the Greek term literally refers to children, it was also used as a figure of speech and a common term of address amongst blue-collar workers. So maybe he's just calling them his friends. Either way, by calling them out as friends, it seems to get their attention, maybe help them to understand who it is. He told them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." So they cast it there, and they were unable to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Remember, back in Luke 5, 1 through 11, I encourage you to read that in your own time. Jesus had went out on the lake with Peter, who had just come up empty after a whole night of fishing. Peter cooperated then with the seemingly petty request from Jesus, which resulted in a massive haul of fish. Peter reacted to this in faith, Luke 5 and verse 8. Now Peter and 6 others are in Galilee waiting for Jesus. They've decided to go fishing again. They don't know what else to do. And this night, just like the one back in Luke 5, has been a complete failure. And what Jesus says in John 21:6 is similar to what he said in Luke 5, with almost the same results. This is not a chance occurrence as if they caught only a few fish or continued with a successful night. If catching fish was simply a question of casting the net a few feet away in a different direction, then these experienced fishermen would have already done that. And there's a good chance they already had. Yet when Jesus tells them to do it and they do it, the net is so full that they cannot even pick it up. Peter will once again grasp the significance and immediately react. Let's look at John 21:6 from the NIV. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. So Jesus made a strange suggestion. There's no logical reason why fishing in the morning light would be better than fishing at night. There's no reason why fishing on one side of the boat would be better than the other side. This is a small boat to begin with. It wasn't even directly a test of trust in Jesus because they don't know it's him yet. This is probably a test of their ability to find the guidance of God in small and unsuspected ways, such as a stranger calling out fishing instructions from the shore. The disciples did as the man told them to, and they were successful beyond expectation. This shows the difference between doing work without divine guidance and with divine guidance. Proverbs 3 and verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Continues in verse 6, in all your ways acknowledge him, submit to him in all your ways, and he'll make your path straight, depending on which translation you use. Here's a perfect example of that. Even though they don't really know it's Jesus yet, though some of them may have had a clue, it didn't make any sense to do what the man told them to do. Well, what good is this going to do? What's Proverbs 3 say? Don't lean on your own understanding. Trust me. Okay? Do you trust God enough to just do what he says, even though it doesn't make sense to you? They did. And look at the result. John 21:7, then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. Here we get into some serious lesson. This is where it gets rich. You see, we know from John chapter 20 in verse 4 that Peter and John ran to the tomb upon hearing the news from the women that the Lord was not there. We know that John reached the tomb first, John 20 and verse 4. And he recognized the fact of Jesus' resurrection first, John 20 and verse 8. He beat Peter to the tomb. He recognized the fact of the resurrection before Peter. And here, John also recognized the identity of the stranger on the shore before Peter did. At least he verbalizes it before anybody else. But here's the important lesson. John was first in recognition, but Peter would be first in action. Faith, if not accompanied by action, is dead. That's what James 2 tells us. On hearing the news, Peter threw on his outer garment and threw himself into the water to reach Jesus as soon as possible. As far as we know, Peter doesn't even know how to swim. He almost drowned another time trying to walk on the water. But it doesn't matter. This is a great example of Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. This is a great example of the difference between being involved or committed. Peter is not just wanting to be involved with Jesus. He's not, oh yeah, that's Jesus. Well, we know we'll go ahead and finish up out here, and when we get to the shore, we'll get to him. No, he is committed. He is intense. He is passionate. He is driven. He is all in. He's not waiting for that boat to get to, it's only 100 yards off. No, he wants to get to Jesus as soon as he possibly can. The boat couldn't move quickly enough for him. Maybe he thought he could walk on the water again. I don't know. But regardless, Peter's reaction is dramatic, and it is a great example. It's a great example of one of my favorite sayings. Don't worry about the horse being blind, just load the cart. He hastily throws on his outer clothes. He jumps into the water so he can get to Jesus before anybody else. The others will follow as they can, hauling the overloaded net. The other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, about 200 cubits away, dragging the net full of fish. They're about a football field away. The New King James, the Old King James, and New American Standard add the detail that this boat was little. And the original Greek term refers to a small boat. This goes back to why it didn't make any sense on which side of the boat. It's a small boat to begin with. It doesn't matter which side you're going on. So while they come along, Peter's already in the water heading to Jesus. The others follow, doing the hard work of bringing the net full of fish with them. Verse 10 tells us that the net contained 153 large fish. This reminds me of the story of Mary and Martha, where one is overly concerned about preparing the meal and the other is overly concerned with Jesus. And Jesus tells the other one, hey, she's doing what's more important. Peter couldn't have cared less about getting those fish to shore. He wanted to get to Jesus. He had his priorities straight. John 21:9, when they landed, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and some bread. This just goes to prove that charcoal barbecues is the way to go. It beats propane every time, and it's biblical. But they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and some bread. When the disciples came to shore, they noticed that the resurrected Jesus was exactly who he had always been, a humble servant. He took the time to prepare a fire and to cook a meal for him. And this is going to set the scene for Jesus to remind Peter of another less happy memory. We'll talk about that when we get to verse 17. Both moments will connect as Jesus restores Peter's status as a faithful disciple. Verse 10 from the New King James, Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish which you have just caught." The order of events shows that Jesus had the food for them before the great catch of fish were brought in. All these fish that these men caught just added to the menu, did not make it. They already had what they needed waiting for them. Verse 11 says, "So Simon Peter went up and hauled the net to land, full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not torn." And this is interesting because in Luke's account of the previous time when they caught a bunch of fish, the net was torn. Now the net's not torn. I may do a lesson on that because we see in Luke's account it's not yet complete. See, Jesus hasn't yet completed his work. But now the net's not torn. Jesus has completed his work. Is there anything in there? I don't know. I'm grasping at straws there, but I just thought that was interesting. Somebody brought that up in the in-person class last week, that in Luke the net was torn. Here the net was not torn. But I want you to notice what Peter did. See, he didn't forget about the work that needed to be done. He wanted to get to Jesus. And then he looks back, he sees his friend struggling, so he goes out and he hauls in the fish. He gets them to shore. Peter took the initiative and dragged the heavy net all by himself because Peter's the natural leader of this group. He's the playmaker. He's going to turn the ball over every now and then, but he's going to make plays when you need to make plays. And he goes out and he does a job. The net wasn't torn, and it held a large catch of 153 large fish. 153 fish plus a wet net would probably weigh at the very least about 300 pounds. So Peter's hauling it up single-handed is a tribute to his physical strength. But I think it also shows us even more that God will provide whatever we need to do what needs to be done. The observation of the exact number of fish and the fact that the net did not break reflect both the eyewitness accounts and a fisherman's perspective. So let's look at verse 11 again from the NIV. There appear to be several miraculous aspects to this particular catch of fish. It was full of large fish. First, they had fished all night and caught nothing. Then on the word of the man on the beach, they dropped the net in one more time and found it so full they couldn't pull it back into the boat. But the net wasn't torn. Second, the fish they caught were not a mix of small, medium, and large fish. They were all large fish. Third, the exact number of fish, 153, is recorded. Now, some believe that this number is prophetic. Maybe it is. Yet, taken at face value, it still represents a large number of large fish, so much so that John chose to record the number. So how big is a large fish? 5 pounds? 10 pounds? More? Well, I got on the internet. That sometimes is good, sometimes is bad, but you can do a quick internet search and find this stuff out. It turns out that there's 3 general categories of commercially harvested fish out there on the Sea of Galilee. Probably the same type of fish they had back then. The largest is the binny or the barbel. The medium-sized fish is called the moosht. The moosht is a type of tilapia. It's also known as St. Peter's fish. The third type of fish is a tiny Kinneret sardine. So if John literally meant large fish when he wrote his gospel, then he was probably talking about the largest of the 3, the binny or the barbel. And again, according to a quick internet search, a large binny would run about 15 pounds per fish. So let's just live large. Let's imagine that John's large fish were in fact those large binny. That means 153 fish weighing 15 pounds each would come to a total of 2,295 pounds. That's over a ton of fish. No wonder they couldn't pull the net back in the boat, yet the net's not torn. Yet Peter goes out and drags it the rest of the way in by himself. There's a lesson in this on the strength that God will provide when we're all in for him, like Peter was. Also helps us to understand the final miraculous aspect of this story, that the net did not break. Let's look at verse 12. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew who it was. They knew it was the Lord. When Jesus first rose from the dead, he passed along a message to the ladies, telling the disciples to meet him in Galilee, Matthew 28:10. He then made at least two appearances to groups of disciples in John's account, John 20:19, John 20:26. This time he appears on shore while the men are out on the water in dim light. The miraculous catch of fish confirms that this is Jesus. None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" The Greek translated as ask carried the meaning of questioning or interrogating. The disciples' lack of questions about Jesus' identity can be taken in several ways. One possibility is John emphasizing the lack of doubt, as if saying there's no need to ask since it's clear. The other option is that the men do believe it's Jesus, but they're tempted to ask just to be sure. This would be like someone asking a close friend, "Is it really you?" Or, as when seeing someone wearing new clothes with a new hairstyle, Jesus in his resurrected form might have been subtly different. I don't know. But look at verse 12. "Come, have breakfast," Jesus said to him. None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. We are again impressed at the servant nature of Jesus. He prepared breakfast for his disciples. And I'm sure it's probably the best breakfast they've ever had. They didn't recognize Jesus from offshore, but now there's no doubt. So let's take a moment and reflect on the many invitations of Jesus that we read about in the Gospels. In John 1:39, Jesus invites the disciples to come and see. "Come," he replied, "and you will see." In Matthew 11:28 through 30, Jesus invites his disciples to come and rest and to learn. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." In Mark 6, Jesus again invites his disciples to come and find rest. Mark 6:31, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." In Matthew 25:34 through 36, Jesus offers an invitation to the righteous to claim their inheritance. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And here in John 21, Jesus invites these 7 disciples to come and eat. John 21 and verse 12. Verse 13, Jesus then came and took the bread and gave it to them, and likewise the fish. The simple act of sharing a meal, especially in the ancient world, represented friendship and trust. It's a big deal. But we also see some fulfillment here in what Jesus had promised back in John chapter 6. John 6:35, then Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." And what did Jesus say in John 21:12? Come. Jesus is often seen eating with his disciples after his resurrection. This is a picture of intimate, friendly fellowship, as well as a sign that the kingdom is upon them. Late preacher Charles Spurgeon, he lived in the 1800s, passed away in 1892. He and Adam Clarke are the two commentators that I use a lot. I'd like to get their thoughts on the scriptures. Here's what Charles Spurgeon said about this particular meal. This is striking. And again, these are just man's words, but it's a good thought. It says, "They ate the bread and fish that morning, I doubt not, in silent self-humiliation. Peter looked with tears in his eyes at that fire of coals, remembering how he stood and warmed himself when he denied his master. Thomas stood there wondering that he should have dared to ask such proofs of a fact most clear. All of them felt that they should shrink into nothing in his divine presence, since they had behaved so ill." That's what Spurgeon said about it. And I could imagine these men sitting around this fire, eating this meal, reflecting on what's gone on the last few days and weeks. I'm sure that fire reminded Peter of those 3 times he denied Christ, how he ran and hid. It reminded Thomas how he brazenly doubted the resurrection. But this is going to set the stage for Peter's restoration, which we'll read about in the next lesson. Verse 14, this was now the third time that Jesus revealed himself to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Remember, after the crucifixion, they ran away and hid. And yet the resurrected Christ was able to appear to them in his glorified body. They were locked in a room so no one could get in. They were so scared Jesus just showed up. Between the miracle of a net full of fish and now seeing him up close, there's no question now this is really Jesus. Everything he said has come true. And while Jesus had shown himself to others, the men on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24, shown himself to the women who came to his tomb, Matthew 28, this is the third time in John's account that he's done it. He's appeared to a group of disciples. He did it in 2019. He did it again a week later with Thomas present, John 20:26, and now on the shore with the fish in John 21. His purpose here is not just to merely meet up with his buddies. It is to give them an important message. It is to teach them an important lesson. And we're going to see that with Peter as we move into verses 17 through 19. And we're going to do that in a couple of weeks, but in our next lesson, well, we may look at verses 17 through 19 in the next lesson, but I also want us to go back over in John 21 and look at verses 1 through 14, take a different angle on it. Now that we've went through it verse by verse so that we have a better understanding of what it says, we'll go back and look at it again, take a little deeper dive in it. But that'll be next week. Now, I'm off this Sunday, so no sermon from the Ezekiel series this Sunday, but next Sunday we'll be back with the Ezekiel lessons, and we'll be picking it up in Ezekiel chapter 34, where Ezekiel takes a turning point. Chapter 34 of Ezekiel is all about the sheep and the shepherds. And there's going to be two lessons come out of Ezekiel 34, and then a third lesson from John chapter 10 that Ezekiel 34 is going to naturally carry us into. But we'll do that next week. In the meantime, praying everybody has a blessed week. Thanks for joining us. Take care, and God bless.